If you're a new or beginning teacher and you're about to start your first day or first week of teaching ever, then I'm willing to bet that you're extremely overwhelmed and very nervous about what could go on. With that said though, don't worry, we've all been there, and even experienced teachers get nervous before the first day of school as well. But with the right preparation, you can ensure that your first day goes really smoothly and sets the tone for an awesome year of teaching in your high school. Hey there teachers, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Mark and I'm a high school teacher from Australia, and my channel is all about helping new and beginning teachers and really even experienced ones get the most out of their teaching and learn a couple of new things along the way. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my tried and true methods and secrets about how I get super organized for my first day of school. I'm a really organized person and I think it makes a big difference when you start teaching, especially for the first time. So stick around, watch these tips, implement them yourself, and you will be ready to kick goals in your first year of teaching. Let's dive on in. Okay, before we begin, just for a bit of context, today is Monday the 16th of January, and I start next Monday, so exactly 1 week from today. As you can see, I'm currently in my classroom where I teach every single one of my lessons, which I'm very fortunate to do. And so I'm here a week early so I can get very organized. You can tell that that's quite a long way away, but if you're able to, as a new or beginning teacher, get into your school ASAP so that you can look at the spaces where you're working and just get things organized, like your desk and your setups the way you like them. Now, when it comes to getting prepared for my first day of teaching, I do a lot of things, but the first thing I do is just make sure that the content I'm going to teach, I am familiar with. I mean, it goes without saying that if you're a teacher, you should obviously know what you're going to be teaching, but sometimes you don't know some things, and it's not because of a lack of content knowledge, but rather just a gap in your own education. So when it comes to getting prepared for each year in terms of knowing the content, I look at the classes that I'm going to be teaching, and I go online and look at the syllabuses which govern what needs to be taught, and I make sure that there are no gaps in my knowledge. Now, for some things like junior mathematics, which I'm teaching this year, I am 100% certain I know everything in that curriculum back to front. But in the senior spaces, even if I've taught something before, which I have, I still like to go back and just double check to make sure that I'm up to scratch, because a lot of the mathematics and whatever your subject area is can get quite complicated at that higher level. So making sure and double checking that you're all over it way before you teach is really important. Hey all, Future Mark here. I just wanted to mention one more thing about knowing the content before you head into teach for the first time. Most of the time, there are going to be unit and term planners already created by the course coordinator for whatever subject you're teaching. So I highly recommend in the week leading up to teaching, or as soon as possible if it's within a week, reach out to your head of department, or if you already know who the coordinator is, reach out to them via email and see if you can get them to flick over the unit planners or term planners to you in advance. That way you can actually narrow down the focus of what you will be teaching. So rather than having to look at the entire curriculum, you can just look at a small subset of it and make sure you got that under control, because I acknowledge that looking at the entire curriculum and making sure you're all over it is quite a big step early on in your career, and you'd rather focus on bite-sized pieces at a time. So that's another tip that you can do to make sure you're all over the content. Alrighty, the second thing that I do to make sure I'm super ready for each year of teaching is to know my classes, and in particular, obviously, know the students within those classes. So in Australia, we have a program called One School, which is where I can go on and I can look up all my student information, my class information, all of that sort of stuff. Depending on where you live, you'll have your own version of that. But wherever it is, whatever it is, make sure you get in there and you actually learn about your students, because it can inform so much of your teaching, and knowing a lot of that in advance is going to really help your planning and preparation. So the sort of things that I'm looking for when I look at a class list and I'm investigating the class to see what they need is, first of all, the overall level of ability. That can change from class to class, and obviously within the class, it can change student to student, but generally you're either going to find one of two things. Either all the students are really dispersed in their abilities. You've got A standard students and you've got E standard students and everything in between. But the other thing you might find is the students are clumped around a specific level of achievement, like most of them are kind of C's, a couple of B's, a couple of D's, but mostly C standards. This is really helpful to know because it kind of tells you or informs you how much differentiation you're going to need to do on a day-to-day basis with that class. The next thing I'm looking for is any behavioral issues in that class. my program, One School, and whatever your program is going to have records of student behavior. And the main thing I'm looking for are any major behavioral infringements. So are there any students who are regularly acting up and getting buddy classed or suspended or anything like that, just so I can keep it on my radar. Now, you don't want to be informing your practice and making judgments about students before you go into the classroom, right? I don't want to bias myself against a student who may have been suspended a bunch of times, because maybe for me, they're a model student. Maybe they just clashed with another teacher. Their interactions together cause the student to be suspended a bunch. So I don't want to cause any biases. I just want to be aware of any potential issues there's going to be with behavior. And the third thing I want to know about my students is, do any of them have a disability that is going to make it harder for them to learn in my classroom? But more importantly, if they do have a disability, how can I accommodate that disability? Like if a student is hearing impaired and they have a system where the teacher can wear a microphone that connects straight to their hearing aid or something like that, I'd like to know about that early so I can get that organized for the student, so I don't have to spend the first week of school running around trying to organize that for them when, I've got 1,000 things on my plate already. Similarly, if I've got students with poor eyesight, I want to make sure I'm aware of it so I can have them sitting at the front and all of those sorts of things. It's just going to make your life way easier when you start, and you're going to be way less surprised about anything that your students are bringing to the table. And just as a quick aside, it's always nice on the first day of school to be able to see a student that you've seen in the class list and you recognize their face and call them by their first name. It's always a shock to them, especially if you've never met them before, because they're like, oh my God, how does he know about me? So yeah, keep that little trick up your sleeve as well. It can create an interesting first impression. Alrighty, and this is going to bring us to my next tip, which is all about organizing your workspace. And it's why I recommend that you get into the school as early as possible in the year so that you can actually do all this before the school year starts. Now, I recognize that most teachers aren't as fortunate as me to have their own classroom. It is much more common in primary school rather than secondary school. But if you are fortunate enough to have your own classroom where you have all your classes, you will have the opportunity, like me today, to set it up the way you want. This is not it, by the way. I'm going to show a montage of me cleaning up this room and organizing it the way I like it. I like group work, so I'm going to put these desks not in rows, but in group work. But if you've got multiple classrooms that you have to go to day to day, it's worth at the very least investigating those classrooms and seeing what you're working with. You should also have a look at the timetable, if possible, to see who else is going to be using that classroom. And perhaps you can ask them if they're open to having it set up the way you like it and to keep it that way. Rightio, so we're up to date with the content that we're going to be teaching. We know all about our students. We have our classroom or classrooms nice and organized the way we like it. What's next? Well, what's next is making sure you have all the equipment you need for your first day of teaching. So that can be things like your computer. If you've got one that is going to work with the school materials, you can have an iPad. If you're a maths teacher or science teacher, you've got your calculators. You've got, if you're into like word processing and use your computer quite a lot, a wireless keyboard and mouse, I highly recommend. Can't recommend these enough, actually. Of course, you've got your whiteboard markers, you've got pens, pencils, rulers. Whatever you can think of, make sure you've got access to it. I know at my school, I get a lot of this stuff given to me, right? Like any stationery I could think of, the school provides it to me. I'm very lucky in that way. I understand that most schools aren't going to be like that, or at least a lot aren't going to be like that. So I recommend finding out what your school is going to give you so that you know what you need to go ahead and purchase yourself. Right? The worst thing in the world would be to rock up expecting there'll be whiteboard markers for you and not have any. So you are actually unable to write on the whiteboard. So just figure out what your school has, what it offers you, so that you can be prepared for your first day of teaching in terms of the equipment that you need. Alrighty, just before I move on, if you're enjoying the video and you feel like you're getting value and you feel like you're more confident about starting a new school year, make sure you like the video. And if you're an experienced teacher or even a new teacher and you think there's something that I've missed so far, leave a comment in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. And after your first day of teaching, make a mental note, set an alarm on your clock, come back to this video and write a comment letting me know how your first day went. I would love to hear all about it. Now, here's a tip that I don't think you'll find in any other video on YouTube about getting ready for your first day. I've watched a lot of them in preparation for this video, but none of them talk about this, and that's understanding what learning management system or LMS that your school uses. There are so many different ones to choose from. You've got OneNote, you've got Blackboard, Collaborate, you've got Canvas, which is what we use, you've got Google Classroom, Apple Classroom. There's just so many different ways that the school can host their information or all their classes and resources online. You are best to find out what it is as soon as possible. Not only should you find out what your school is going to be using in terms of LMS, but you should also become fluent in it. So navigating it. There's so many teachers here at my school, and I'm assuming most schools, who are really actually bad at navigating the LMS, and so kind of opt not to use it where possible. And I think that's doing a real disservice to the kids. Just so you are on the same page, if you're not quite sure yet, an LMS is essentially where teachers put up content for students, and we use ours so that if any students are away for whatever reason, they can engage in the lesson the exact same way all of the other students would. So for example, on my math channel, How to Maths, link in the description below if you're interested, I upload all my videos to YouTube and then embed them on our learning management system so that if I make a video of one of my lessons, any student who's away can then go ahead and watch that video. Furthermore, any students who are in a class with a substitute teacher who may not be able to teach that level of maths or maths at all, they can go to the learning management system and play my videos instead. So effectively, I can be teaching 2 or 3 classes at once. So each school is going to use their learning management system differently and at a different level, but at the very least, find out what yours is and become fluent in using it. Now, this one you might have to do some emailing around to get information on. However, you should be familiar with your school's policies and procedures. It should go without saying, but you should know exactly what you should do in all of the different circumstances that are going to come up across your first few days of teaching. So this involves things like the school's behavior management plan. So this is something that I didn't find out about at my school for quite a long time, and it's probably my fault because I didn't go searching for it. But I wasn't 100% sure of what to do in the various situations that come up in terms of behavior. If a student swears in my classroom, not at me, not at another kid, just swears in the classroom, what is the school expecting me to do about it? This is ignoring all of your personal opinions about how bad it is to just swear periodically. I'm talking about what does the school expect me to do about it, right? What do I do if a kid swears at another kid? What do I do if a kid swears at me? What do I do if a kid punches another kid? What do I do if a kid refuses to get out of my classroom? What do I do if a kid just isn't doing anything that bad, but just repeatedly interrupts the class? What am I supposed to do? And finding out what your school's policies and procedures are is really important because it's all different. At my school, we have a buddy class system where I know on my teaching line, whatever period it is, I know that I can send a student to one of my colleagues and they will accept them into the classroom, and I'll have to record that as a behavior incident. And then if that continues on and that happens multiple times for the same student and me, that can get escalated to one of our deans, which is one of the heads of year. That's going to differ though. Some schools, especially those who are smaller, right? We have like 2,000 kids. Smaller schools might only have one dean or one head of discipline or whatever it is, or they might have a responsible thinking center, which is something I've heard about as well. We don't have it, but other schools do. So just figure out what it is. Now, it's not just behavior though, right? So emergency drills, fire drills, lockdowns, all sorts of different things can happen, and you should know what you're supposed to do. Sometimes this is as simple as going on the website or emailing your principal or emailing the person who gave you the job or the human resources manager or whoever. Just send an email and find out. And it's also worth knowing about the chain of command for your school. So if something's an issue for you, who do you go to? Do you go to your head of department? Do you go to another senior teacher? Do you go straight to a principal? Whatever it is, find out what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to talk to. It's just going to put you at ease so that if something does happen, it probably won't, but if something does happen, you at least know how you're supposed to handle it. Now, before the last tip that I'm going to give you, which is the most important one in my opinion, I've got a mini bonus tip here for you. And that's just to always, for your first day, keep in the back of your mind that it's not going to go the way that you've planned it. It doesn't matter how prepared you are. It doesn't matter how many hours you spent planning your lesson down to the minute. Something's going to happen and it's going to ruin your lesson. Not necessarily in a hugely negative way. I just mean that it's going to throw you off, and you need to be ready for that mentally. You're going to develop over the years, better and better, the skill to adapt and differentiate on the fly. You're not going to be great at it the first time, but just keep in mind that the kids aren't going to notice if your lesson isn't amazing. right? They're going to notice if you don't do something crazy, like snap and run out of the classroom screaming. But if you're in the classroom and things just aren't going quite the way you expected, even though you feel like there's a spotlight on your person and that everyone's looking at you, they're not really, and they're more interested in themselves than in you. So just take a deep breath. Okay, accept that something weird happened and do your best to adapt to that situation. After the lesson, you can go to another colleague or go to a support person in the school and just let them know what happened and how you handled it, and ask if they've got any advice for you. Most people are absolutely lovely and they'd be more than happy to give you advice on how to handle a situation. Alrighty, and the last tip for this video about preparing for your first day of school is to ensure that you prioritize self-care. Okay, it's so easy to get caught up in thinking that the students are the priority, or the school's the priority, or your lessons are the priority, or the parents are the priority, but none of that is true. As I've mentioned in my tips for surviving your first few years as a teacher, tip number 4 was prioritize self-care, and it bears repeating. Make sure that on your first day of school, you have a breakfast. Make sure, even if you're not the kind of person who has breakfast, maybe just grab a banana from the service station on your way to work, or have a protein shake, or whatever it is. Make sure you got something in your belly to settle it. Make sure you eat a decent lunch on your day at school. You probably are going to be overwhelmed and you're going to be so busy preparing for all your different lessons on that day, you're going to forget to eat. But if you can, make sure you eat, and probably most importantly, get a good drink bottle and drink as much water as you possibly can. Staying hydrated in this job is something that I often forget about, and I often think in the end of the day, in the last couple of lessons, I get really tired and I think, oh, it's time for a coffee. But in reality, most of the time, it's probably because I'm dehydrated and I need some water. So grab a water bottle, make sure you stay hydrated, make sure you eat food, and also just take some time after your lessons to breathe. It's okay. Something bad probably happened in your lesson, something you didn't expect. You probably reacted poorly to a situation, or you taught something wrong and a kid had to correct you in front of the classroom, or whatever it is. Take a breath. You are not the first teacher to make a mistake. I've made a mistake probably every lesson I've ever taught in my whole life. So take a breath, clear your head, prioritize some self-care, some positive thoughts, positive reinforcement for yourself, and realize that you are new to this, but you are dedicated to getting better. And that is awesome. Alrighty, and now for a sneak peek into your first day of teaching, a tip for your very first day when you're actually there in the classroom for the first time. Make sure you prioritize building relationships with your students. The instinct is going to be to teach the content ASAP, but it's much more important to get to know the kids, ask them about their holidays, ask them about themselves, get to know them, share a bit about yourself, and create a culture in your classroom where everyone is valued and that you care for everyone and they should all care for one another. It's going to create a great environment for you. If you want some tips about how to build awesome relationships with students, which is sneakily the best part of teaching, click on the video card up here. I go into depth into 5 tips that I think is the best way to build relationships and why it's so important. So go watch that video. And other than that, have a great first day and first week as a teacher. You're the best.